Well, then I think we're ready to get started here. So thank you everyone again for attending our webinar today. My name is Katie and I'll be showing you how you can use o²S²PARC to collaboratively work on your computational modeling or data analysis projects. To try everything that we cover in this webinar, we assume that you already have an o²S²PARC account, but if you don't, I'll tell you how you can get one at the end of the webinar. So our goals today are to teach you how to create organizations on o²S²PARC with whom you can share projects, then how to share the projects or studies and manage access permissions to those studies. Finally, I'll show you how to publish your studies as templates so that others can copy and use those for their own research projects. Getting straight to it, let's just start with what we mean by organizations. So what is an organization on o²S²PARC? An organization is basically what we call a group of users that can share their content with each other. So this could be, for example, yourself, and then the research team that you work with, whom you'd like to collaborate on studies with. Any user can be a part of multiple organizations and share with multiple of these members. There are different access privileges that exist in an organization. A normal member can access and also share their content with the organization. A manager level member has regular member privileges and in addition can add or remove members or promote other members to managers. Finally, administrators have all the privileges of managers, but also can edit an organization's description and also delete that organization. So now we'll show you how you can create an organization for yourself on o²S²PARC. To do this, you go into the preferences of your user account and then go to the bottom tab, which has the organizations. You'll see a list of the organizations you're a part of, and you can create a new one by clicking the button on the top. Once you're starting to create your organization, you can give a title and description and also an optional link for a thumbnail image. Once you click create, that'll create your new organization and you can access it to add new members by entering their email addresses in the members field. So to add members, you can only add members that are already registered o²S²PARC users. So if you want to invite someone to o²S²PARC, they'll have to ask for an account first. If a user is successfully added, you'll see the message invitation sent to that email address. So this is going to be the email address that was used by that user when they registered for an o²S²PARC account. Now, if there's an error, for example, if you used an email address that is not attached to a registered o²S²PARC account, you're going to see an error message here, something went wrong with the invitation, and then you'll know that that person was not successfully added to your organization. Now, on the picture on the right, you can see that after you have added a user, you can edit their permissions. So with clicking on the three-dot button next to that user's name, you can choose different options. When you create an organization, you're going to be automatically by default an administrator, which means that you can promote them to managers, remove them. You can also delete that organization. So now that you have an organization, we can see how you can actually share studies with members of your organization. First, we're going to cover what it means to share. When we say sharing, what we really mean is allowing others in your organizations to view and or modify your o²S²PARC studies. So right now, there are two current ways to share your studies on o²S²PARC. First, you can share an instance of a study, or you can publish your study as a template study and then share that template. You can share in both ways to individual members or with entire organizations. As I said before, you can belong to multiple organizations, so you can share with groups of people or just individual people. Now, what do we mean when we say sharing an instance of a study? Sharing an instance is meaning that there's only one study that exists. So that means that any modifications that a user does, one of the users who has access, will affect that study for everyone who has access to that study. So this is an appropriate thing to do when you're working collaboratively on a study. So if one person is developing code that someone else needs access to and is also developing on, then this is a reasonable option for sharing an instance of a study. You can also modify the permissions when you're sharing a study. You can share it with someone with only view access such that they can look at it and then run the contents of the study, but they cannot modify that study pipeline. So if they try, they're going to get this message: you do not have writing permissions, so changes will not be saved in that study. Collaborators, on the other hand, can view and run, but they can also change that study pipeline. The study owner, of course, can do all of these things. And in addition, they can also delete the study. When a study is shared with you, it will appear in your studies tab on o²S²PARC with various different icons. So if you are a viewer, you're going to see this little eye icon at the bottom right of that study tab. If you are part of an organization with which this study is shared, you're going to see this little group of people icon in the upper left-hand corner. After you've shared permissions, you can also change those permissions by going to the options next to the name of that person or organization that you're going to be sharing with. To show you how this looks like on o²S²PARC, the way that you access these options are to click on the three-dot button on the upper right-hand corner on a study card. So here you're in your studies tab, and then for a study that you own, you can you can click on the three-dot button, and that brings you to those options. So you click on the sharing option, and then you look at the drop-down list, which will give you all of the organizations that you belong to with whom you can share, and also all of the members in that organization. When you choose someone, then you can click add, and then hopefully it will say collaborators have successfully been added. Now on the right hand of each collaborator, you can manage their permissions, of course, after the fact, since in this example, you are the owner of that study. And for them, that study will appear again on their studies tab. It's important to note, though, that when you share an instance of a study, only one user who has access to that study, regardless of their privileges, can enter that study at a time. And this is to avoid conflicting changes in the study pipeline. So we want to avoid if two people are changing the pipeline simultaneously and possibly in conflicting ways. Next, we'll cover how to share a study as a template study. First, we'll cover what is a study template. So templates are found in the Discover tab. They are essentially studies, and clicking on one will create a copy of that study, which then appears in your Studies tab. Publishing as a template means that that study is frozen in its current state. So anything that is as is will be inside of the template. These are meant to be more or less completed studies that can be useful to any number of people. So when you publish as a template, that study is frozen. And if you give access permissions to your organizations, then they can make copies of that study in that state. As opposed to sharing study instances, changes in each user's copy won't affect the copy of any other user, and it won't change the template. So if you change also the original study that was published into a template form, that also won't change the template. So this is an appropriate option to use for when you want others to reuse your completed pipeline as part of their work, or have someone else play around with your project, that you can be sure that it won't impact your original version. For template user permissions, this is something that you can adjust as well. So the template user permissions are pretty much the same as when you are sharing study instances. Viewers can again view or run a template. Collaborators have viewer permissions. They can change or edit the study pipeline and delete connections in their copy. Again, these changes don't make their way back to the template. Owners, of course, have collaborator permissions and then can also delete that template. To give you an idea of how that works, again, when you go into your Studies tab, you can choose the option Publish as a template in the three-dot button next to a study card. You can choose to publish it privately, or you can choose an organization with whom you would like to share this new template. Once you publish it, then it should appear as a new template in your Discover tab. If you publish it privately, then it's only available to you. Of course, you can change the permissions after the fact. So here I can change or remove this collaborator or add new ones. So you can add either individual people or organizations to have access to this template. So that is pretty much everything we wanted to cover in terms of how to create and delete organizations, how to manage permissions of members in organizations, how to share these study instances, how to manage access to those instances, how to publish templates, and also how to manage access to those published templates. So we hope this was useful to you in your research and for your collaborations. As always, we have several resources in case of questions. You can ask us directly for support by emailing us at support@o²S²PARC.io. Our documentation can be found at docs.o²S²PARC.io. And we, of course, welcome you to check out our open source repository for o²SPARC. You can have a local instance running of o²SPARC if you would like. And thanks so much for your time. And if there are any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
So with a viewer permission, you can't change the study, but you can run it. Correct. What if that study, running that study is changing, say, data or something like that? Does that make those changes or produce outputs that would disappear? Or are they...
Right. Yes, that so if there are parameters in this study, then a viewer would not be able to change them, and so the outputs would not change. That's one thing. And so the data are not really what we are thinking of for viewer permissions. So viewers, you can't change any of the nodes, any of the services, nor their connections. So it's hard to think of a way that this would change the data produced, unless you have an example of that.
Oh, okay, I see. So every time it runs, it would produce the same output, so it's not going to matter.
Exactly.
Okay, no, sorry. I get it now. Thanks.
So I have a question in the chat. What is the difference between the Spark portal and o²SPARC? Well, the Spark portal is basically the one point where all of these resources that you have as Spark investigators intersect. And we at ETIS are just one of those. We produce one of those tools, o²SPARC, which is the simulation platform. So this is where you can create and run simulations. If you would like to learn more about that, I encourage you to take a look at our documentation website. And in addition, you can explore all of the different tools and resources on the Spark portal under the section Tools, I believe. I can also pull that up very quickly. So this would be the Spark portal. And through this, you can also access different published studies on o²SPARC. And the address would be sparc.science. And o²SPARC is found at o²SPARC.io.
Curious. If you're uploading data to the Spark website, is there like money set aside by the funding agency to upload the data by those who are uploading it, different from what you would normally do in the day-to-day operations?
I suppose this would depend on how much data this is. So the main organization that deals with this is called Blackfin, and they deal with the data hosting for Spark investigators. And they have, of course, a budget set aside for the data of Spark investigators. I don't know if, for example, you have tons and tons, so like thousands and thousands of terabytes or something, if there's some limitation on that. But for data that is typically produced during experimentation, that should be covered.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure. And I have another question from the chat. If I want to leave some parameters to the user, I have to upload the model as a template, correct? So no, you can share an instance of a study, and then as long as they're not just viewers, if they are collaborators, then they can also change the parameters. And actually, there's one thing that maybe is useful for you to see. So for certain services, you can actually change what is visible in the parameters. I'll choose something that has many parameters. Try this one. So I think you can, if you choose the edit icon for a computational service, what you can do is edit whether something is visible or read only. And when you share that, those permissions will persist. So everything right now is editable, but if I, for example, want the user to be able to see a certain parameter, but not be able to change it, I can mark it as read only. And then this would be not editable, but others would be. So this is irrespective of whether you share the instance or if you share it as a template.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions? Great. Well, thanks again, everyone, for attending.